This is part 2 of Introduction to 3D Studio Max, Building Your Death Scene. We're going to address textures and materials in this tutorial, so let me maximize this viewport. Textures are nothing more than flat images, 2D images mapped onto 3D geometry. So let's go ahead and get some textures. I'm going to go to the web browser, type in free wood texture. And texturex.com has a lot of good large textures. The larger the texture, the better. You can actually go out with a camera and take pictures of wood and use those as textures. If you already got some pictures of wood on your computer, you can use those as textures. Any image you want, you can use as a texture. You can use a picture of your child as a texture if you wanted to, or your dog, whatever you want. Anyway, so let's say this piece of wood here. And again, like I said, you're looking for something that's a very large image. So this here is a pretty good size image. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to right click and say Save Image As, and I'm going to save it to my 3D folder. Let's see, Tutorials, 3D Studio Max, 3D, into the text folder for textures. And you can see here I already saved out 4 different pieces of wood, and that's where you can save yours. That's where I suggest you save yours, is into the texture folder. I'm going to hit cancel. Okay, so now that we have textures, let's talk about how we get those textures onto an object. And that's when we use materials. Now the material editor is right here. It's M on the keyboard as a shortcut key. If you do not see your material editor laid out like this, what you want to do is go to Mode and change it to Compact. You're probably in Slate Mode. Slate Mode is a node-based way of interacting with your materials. It's new, I think, since 2010. Now don't quote me on that. So I'm going to start with the compact material editor, and later I'll address the node-based one. But basically they're the same thing, only different ways of interacting with the material. So each one of these is a material, an individual material. And you can see here I can slide and see more. If you do not see this many in your viewport, you can actually right click and say 5x3, 6x4, or 3x2. I'm going to stick with the larger thumbnails. And you are not limited to this many materials. You can actually click this icon here and get more materials, but we'll address that later. Okay, so materials is the way light interacts with the surface of an object, and it also allows us to apply our textures to an object. So if I come in here, wireframe gives me the ability to make my object a wireframe. Double-sided allows me to render the backside of the polygons. Okay, so let me turn those both off. Faceted gives me a disco ball look, which each face gets a slightly different shade. And face map projects a texture to each individual polygon. Now, the blend option is the settings for diffuse and specularity and basically all this information here. So if I change this to, let's say, stratus, you can see here that that information is now changed in how I interact with the material. So I'm going to go back to blend for now. Okay. Diffuse is the color of the object. So right now, if I click this gray box and change it to, let's say, green, I get a green box. I can change it to brown. Let's go dark brown. I can grab these sliders in here to control it. Something like that. So now I have a dark brown. Specular color is the highlighted area. So let me turn up specular level. You can see now I have a highlight. I can change how glossy it is. So you have a lot of settings in here. And softness deals with the back shading. Let me bring this up. I can change the specular color to, let's say, a yellow. I'm going to hit cancel. And I'm going to set these back down to 0. Okay, so then you also have self-illumination, which is basically as if the material is emitting light. Now you barely see it happening. Let me actually switch this to a color. And you can see now the object is emitting a particular color. So if I had light bulbs, this is exactly how I would texture the light bulb. Sort of. It's one way. So anyway, opacity is the see-through of the object. So if I dial this down, I can now see through the object. Let me turn this icon on up right here. That gives me a background to see. So I can dial this back up. You can see here it's getting less opaque. All right. Or sorry, it's getting more opaque. Not less. More opaque, the higher it is. Less opaque, the lower it is. Okay. Icons right here deal with how this image right here is viewed. So I can say backlight. Let's say I go back to specular. I can turn this off. So now I can see how shadowing is interacting. Let me set this back to 0. I have sample type. That gives me the ability to switch this to like a square or a cylinder. And let's see what else. I'll talk about the preview modes later. This X right here resets the texture. I will lose all my settings that I've applied if I say yes. I'm gonna hit no. So that resets it. If you don't like what you've done, just click the X button, it resets it. Okay, so let's talk about applying this material to the object. There's two ways of doing it. You can click and drag and drop, and it applies it. I'm gonna Control Z. Or you can select the object, make sure the material is selected in the material editor, and click this icon here, Assign to Selection. So yep, there's two ways. All right, so let's get the material or the texture on this. If you see this little gray box, you're going to click on that and you're going to go to bitmap. Now you can see there's lots of stuff I can apply. I can a gradient, particle age. I mean, that's for particles, but smoke, effect, twirl, there's lots of options in here. So I'm going to stick with bitmap and I'm going to click OK. And that's going to allow me to bring in an image. I'm going to choose the first piece of wood that I found and click open. So now you can see that there's a material in my a texture being displayed on my texture editor. And now all this might seem overwhelming. We're not actually going to mess with nothing in here, but you can see here, this is where my texture is being pulled from. If I wanted a different one, I can click on here and get a different one, cancel. I can click reload if it's not updating correctly. I can crop it and change the way the filtering is set to it. But in this case, I don't need to mess with any of this stuff. So I'm going to go back up to the top here. I can play with tiling and angle, but again, I'm not going to mess with any of this stuff in here. So I'm going to hit this up arrow. That will go back to the primary section. Now you might think, well, why can't we see the texture in the viewport? Well, in older versions, you actually might be seeing the texture already in the viewport, but the newer 3D Sumax versions, you actually have to activate it in two spots. Number one, you have to turn it on right here. Show material in viewport. And in our case, it automatically updated in the viewport, and that's good. I actually don't have to do anything else. Sometimes, though, you have to go to shaded materials, shaded material with maps right here. Sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes you do. So again, this icon right here allows me to display the texture in the viewport. Now you can see it looks pretty good, but the grain is going the wrong way, and you can see here we're getting edging. This is a seam. Now there's not much we can do about seams. You're always going to get seams when you're mapping a non-tileable texture onto a 3D object. And tileable means that it literally, when you tile it, it looks perfect, seamless. It has none of these weird seams. But let's go ahead and try to adjust this. So I'm going to go to the Modify panel over here with the object selected. Hit this arrow and scroll all the way down to UV map. Okay, so this is a basic UV map structure. And you can see here it created a nice over the edge effect. But really what this does is gives me the ability to control length, width. I'm going to undo both those. Right now it's set to planar, so that means it's projecting at a single direction. I can tile it. I'm going to undo those two. Undo. And of course the W stands for the Z axis. I can't tile that because it's a planar projection. Now I can change the projection to cylinder, sphere, shrink wrap, box. Since this is a box, that's probably a good idea to switch it to. You can see here it's now changed the way it interacts. And of course, when I come in here and play with these settings, it changes it up a bit. It's not too bad. Okay, so like I said, I don't like the direction of the grain. If you hit this plus sign, it activates the gizmo. You click on the gizmo, I can go to my rotate tool, and now I can rotate it. I'm rotating on the Z axis. Let's say Control Z. I'm just going to say 90 degrees. Boom. And now I'm going to hit this button fit, so it automatically fits for me. And you can already see that that's a better layout for the top. So I'm going to increase the width. Oops. Nope, not the width. The length. because I don't like the way it looked compressed. So probably something like that. Okay, so now I'm getting a decent, well, let me increase the height as well. Yeah, that's looking way better. A million times better. So now really the seams that I'm catching is the ones here on the front. Like I said, you'll have seams somewhere. You can't stop that. I could switch this back to planar if I like the way it's wrapping here. And basically this is not real wood on my desk. It's a wrap, so that's kind of the way it looks. And if I never saw the side of this piece, I could switch it to planar and not worry about anything else if I was just seeing the front and the top. But I'm going to go back to box because I think I'm going to see both, and I'm okay with there being a seam here. Now there is one other technique to controlling the unwrap for an object, and that is using UVW unwrap. That's this icon on here, but we'll address that later because that's a whole different ball game. That's where you actually cut apart the geometry yourself, so you can choose where the seams are at. Okay, so moving forward, that looks good. Let me go ahead and apply this material to this wood piece here. And because it's an instance, it's automatically going to generate the same UV settings. So I don't have to go through and apply and adjust. Okay, so now I have this wood piece in the corner. I'm going to try a different wood texture to it. So I'm going to go to a new material slot. I'm going to click the word diffuse, bitmap, click open. And I'm going to choose wood. I'll choose this one. I think this one will look nice. And click open. Now I'm going to turn it, let's go to the top, turn it on, and drag and drop. I kind of like that look. Now, I would actually take this wood piece into Photoshop and change its hue and saturation to match this wood color here, so it looks more saturated, but for now I'll leave it. But anyway, so again, we can do the same thing. I can choose, come over to UV, let me select the object, turn that off. Now I can select the object. Okay, so now I can add UVW map. And you can see here it automatically already changed how it's interacting. I can change this one to maybe a cylinder. Or sorry, cylinder. I click sphere. I'm going to say fit. And that just looks terrible. Let me turn on cap. There we go. And of course I have the same control gizmo. I can move it. So that's not looking half bad. Let's go back to box. I think that's giving me the best result. And of course the height here looks terrible. So let's increase the height. Now I am getting a seam right here, and that's because, again, I'm box projecting this. All right. So there's my two wood pieces. And just for the sake of, I don't like the fact that this is slightly different tint, and because I haven't taken it into Photoshop, let me just go get a different texture. So I'm going to go into, with it selected, I'm going to click on the M, and I'm going to click here and just change it to, let's say, this one. Click open. And that one matches definitely better. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the top. And of course, I can start playing with specularity for these. So these have a little bit of specular glare on them, just because they're a fake wood, something like that. So 4222, I'll apply that to this one. 42, 22, there we go. Okay. I'm going to scroll through these parameters real quick to show you what they are. So extended parameters gives you the ability to play with advanced transparency options. And wireframe options is where you can control the wireframe thickness when I had this on. Go down to the next one. Super sampling. This deals with basically how clean the materials look or the textures look. So I can change enable local turn off global, use enable local, or I can give it a specific algorithm. I'm going to stick with use global. And again, that's about kind of almost like anti-aliasing. Let me go to maps. And the maps category gives me the ability to control how much the diffuse is interacting with, or the texture, sorry, is interacting with the diffuse slot. So if I dial this down, you can see here the texture is getting darker and darker, and it's going more towards the brown color I have. So if I bring it all the way down, it's 100% brown. If I bring it all the way up, it's the texture. So I can mix these if I wanted a darker wood texture. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Or a lighter if I had this a lighter color. Let's create a bump map to show you how this works. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to open up this photo into Photoshop. So I'm going to right click. Actually, let me just open up Photoshop. There we go. If you don't have Photoshop, you can use GIMP. You can also use this program right here. Found that online. That's free. So GIMP is free. This is free. I'm sure there's other photo manipulation programs out there that are free. Just Google free photo editing programs, and I think a ton will come up. So I'm going to use Photoshop just because I'm used to it. If you're a student, it's $30 a month. It's not really that bad of a deal. You get the full Adobe Creative Suite package. But basically the idea is you just want to change your image into a black and white image. Because the way bump works is that blacks are low, whites are high, and the grays are in between. So let me drag and drop this piece of wood in here. And I'm just going to go Image, Adjust, and Black and White. I'm going to just click OK. Okay, so it looks good. I'm going to hit Control L for levels, which you can also go up to Image, Adjust, and it will be under Adjust. It will be called Levels. So anyway, let me tighten this up a little bit, make it a little bit darker, a little bit brighter. I think that's going to work. Click OK. So now this area bothers me a little bit. I'm going to try to use my, not clone tool, not blur and sharpen, where'd it go? Okay, my dodge tool. So my dodge tool allows me to brighten up certain areas of the image. So I'm going to increase the brush. That's the brackets right next to P, increases and decreases. So I want to get rid of this dark spot area because that's going to add a dent where I don't want a dent. Same thing in here. So it's really just the scratches I want. All right, let's try that. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and it's Wood 1. I'm going to go Wood 1 _ bump. Save. And save as a JPEG, click OK. Close out Photoshop. So now I have a black and white image. Go back to my 3D program, and where it says bump, click None, Bitmap, Open. Click on my black and white image, click Open. And I'm going to hit the up arrow. So you can see, let me double click this material so you can see what's going on. That gives me the ability to create a small thumbnail. And boom, you can see here that there's these little bumps now being applied. If I turn it off, nice and flat. Turn it on, it creates this almost like organic feel to the wood. And of course I can increase the value to, let's say, 50. So you can even bring more value to the wood. So I'm going to bring it back down to 30. 30 I thought was nice. I'm going to close this. And we don't see that in the viewport. Okay, so that was this side wood here. But if I go to my render icon, and that's this one right here, not the render 360 stuff. In fact, I'm going to delete these buttons just because they're in my way and I don't want to accidentally select them. So let me go, I can always bring them back by resetting my viewport. Right click on the button and say delete button. Yes, I don't like these. Right click, delete button. Yes. So now I'm going to click on the render icon. And you can see here, we're not really seeing it too much. Let me zoom in more. In fact, actually, if I switch my perspective to show safe frame, now I can see what's going to be rendered. Let me go render again. and voila, now you can see the bump being applied. Okay, so again, if I was looking for more of a realistic wood, that's exactly how I would do it. If not, then of course I would turn this off. Because in my case, the desk is actually very smooth. Like I said, it's a fake wood. It's just a wrap. Okay. So moving forward, showed you how to use a bump map, and all maps are controlled that way. You can have a actual color image when you're dealing with specular color, and same thing with diffuse color. But when you're dealing with levels, you're going to use a black and white image. Let's work on the glass material now. So I'm actually going to come out of my show safe frame. All right, so I maximize my viewport area. Grab a new material. I should go back and rename these. So I'm on the top of the stack. Yep, go wood 1, and say wood _ 1. Make sure at the top of the stack, wood _ 2. And this last one I'll call glass. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this glass to my glass piece. I'll do it to both actually. All right. Now I'm going to play with some settings. Now there's so many different ways to create glass in 3ds Studio Max. Right now we're using the standard render. Later on we'll probably address Mental Ray and its capabilities. But for right now, let's stick with the standard render. So in diffuse, I'm going to set this to black. And this is preference. Some people don't actually like doing this, but I'm going to set it to black. And then in my opacity right here, I'm going to click on the little icon and I'm going to choose fall off. Okay. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to switch the fall off type to Fresnel. And basically what this does is it kind of softens the inside and allows the outside to be a little bit harder. If that makes any sense. Let me go back up to the top. So under my opacity, I have fall off. I want to increase my specular level because glass is very shiny. So let's just dial this way up. Something like that. And I'm going to scroll down to refraction. And we'll do actually reflection and refraction, but let's click on refraction for right now. Click on the word none. And the quickest results, the stuff that's going to give me the fastest render times, is going to be ray trace. All right, this is going to give me the fastest results. So I'm going to click OK. And it's not as controllable as the other options for reflection, but you can see here you have attenuation, basic material structure, and material extensions if you want to add density extensions to it, but we don't want to deal with any of that. Now I can say auto detect, but in this case this is a refraction, so I'll set to refraction. Use global anti-aliasing, that's fine. I don't need to change that. I'm going to click the up arrow and make sure my super sampling is set to, I'm going to choose enable, and the last option's fine. And this is going to keep objects from looking grainy for this particular setup, and I think that's good. So fall off, we have a ray trace. Let's go ahead and apply reflection. Again, we're going to use ray trace and set this to reflection. Click up. Now I'm going to dial down the reflection to being, let's say, 50. And let's go ahead and try rendering this, see what result we get. And there's our glass. So light's passing through it, reflecting. Now, of course, we have nothing on the surface to reflect. For those of you who do not know, reflection is like the reflection off a mirror when light bounces off a mirror. And refraction is when light passes through an object, bounces around, and comes back out. So that's the difference between the two. So let's go ahead and close the render. And let's do the metal bars down here. So go to the material editor. And let's try this material, a new one. I'm going to call it Metal 1. And let me just go ahead and grab a bunch of these metal pieces. I'm holding down Control to select more than one. So I can grab All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and apply the metal one to all of the selection. And let's go ahead and start playing with the settings. So for a metal, it's kind of a chromy look. So it's almost pure white. Click OK. Definitely highly reflective with the specular. I'm going to jump down to maps and I'm going to use reflection. Open up maps and let's do ray trace. I'm just going to go ahead and click render. That's looking pretty good. Now, let's see here. Material setup. Don't have to worry about that. I could play with the actual, instead of using blend, I can use metal and play with this overall look. For how light bounces off the surface. So I'm going to leave that for now. So last thing that we have in the scene besides this wood back here, in fact, actually, let me just grab one of the wood materials and apply it. And I'll actually add a UVW map. I'll set it to box and nope, not the width, the height. There we go. Okay. Now let's work on the suction cups. So instead of trying to go through and grab all the suction cups, I'm going to come up here to my select by name, scroll down and S cup all the way through S cup 12. This is why we use naming conventions, so I can find things quickly. So now you can see I have all of them selected. Go to a new material, go ahead and hit apply. And I will actually, in fact, before I do that, the suction cup, no, let's go ahead and just do it this way. I was going to make a duplicate of the glass, but let's just start from scratch. So we've applied a new material. Again, make sure it's applied. We'll call it S cup. Okay, let's jump back up to the top here. The ambient, I'm going to switch back to black. And diffuse, I should say. Increase some specular on it, but this one is not going to be hot or as thin as the glass because it's plastic, so it has a broader reflection area. Scroll down to, we're going to use refraction this time, not reflection. We'll use ray trace, click open, and jump back up. Probably dial this down a little bit to, let's say, 80. So it's not as intense. You can see if it's set it to 100, it's more intense. If I set it to 10, it's less intense. So let's go 80. And let's go up to the opacity. Click on this and use the fall off. Click open, change it to Fresnel. And jump back up. I can even actually apply a Fresnel map to the refraction. Nah, that's fine. I'm going to leave it. I don't think I need to. Okay, so this might actually jump up rendering times a lot because now this object has actually got a lot of different angles to it as opposed to the glass. So let's find out. Let's rotate up here. I'm going to go ahead and click Save and click Render. Yeah, it's brought it up some, not too much. But you can see here it's actually reflecting through. I'm going to go ahead and hit Cancel and zoom in here. Hit Render. Now don't worry about these terrible looking edges because we're going to be playing with render settings later and cleaning all that up. But you can see here now it's the suction cup is now reflecting refracting the light behind it, creating this beautiful refraction. Pretty cool. And if I wanted these to stick out a little bit more, I probably could tint them a little bit. But maybe on the specular, I'll leave it for now, but there you have it. There's your suction cups. Okay, so I think I'm going to call it good for this part. And we're going to go on to part 3. And in part 3, we're going to start modeling out the computer and the things that go on the desk, because we're pretty much done with the desk. I think there's anything else we really have to worry about. So yes, go ahead and join me for part 3,